Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me today. My name is Alex Koral. I'm Regulatory General Counsel with Sovos ShipCompliant, and I am very happy to be back here talking to everybody at another craft beer professionals conference. I've been an attendee for the last few ones, talking to you all about direct-to-consumer shipping issues. This is just always such a great conference, so I just really want to thank you all for being here to listen to me. Thank the CBP also for inviting me back. Andrew in particular. Again, these are just great events and happy to have this engagement. And I am here today to talk to you about third-party services and direct-to-consumer shipping. Last few times I've been talking about more of the basic rules, the regulations around direct-to-consumer shipping. And so today I'll be getting into something a little bit more nuanced, a little bit more detailed, what to know when you are looking into potential partners and how you are engaging with the market. If you're going to build out your own direct-to-consumer shipping system, what kind of services are out there and what sort of gotchas might be out there that you need to know about in case you sign up with a partner that leaves you at potential risk of regulatory enforcement. And so, like I said, there's a lot to get into, a lot of nuances here, so we can dig in. Just a quick little background on who Sovos ShipCompliant is. We are a software service, a software compliance service, providing automated tools for the beverage alcohol industry for you to manage your direct-to-consumer shipping and three-tier interstate shipping regulations. We offer a full suite of cloud-based solutions, providing order-by-order compliance checks, tax calculations, tax reporting, brand label registrations, TTB, COLA applications as well. So a full suite of all sorts of federal and state compliance needs. We are prepared to service you. So we do recommend you do check us out. If you are interested in finding out more about direct-to-consumer shipping, we have plenty of free information on our website as well if you just want to kind of get a understanding of this market without signing up for anything in particular. Again, so my agenda for today is really to talk a lot about the more logistical ends and the actual practices of direct-to-consumer shipping, how that gets done, and again, what kind of services are out there to make this a little bit easier. So we'll talk a little bit about what is direct-to-consumer shipping and what can make it hard. Talk about logistical challenges, what kind of partners are out there to help you manage that, and then get into some of the more, can be a little bit tricky, can be a little bit nuanced questions about working with a marketplace facilitator or other third-party market services out there if you're going to be selling online. I think that we should have some time at the end for Q&A. So if you do have questions, feel free to enter them into the comments section. If you have anything right in the moment, I might interrupt myself, but otherwise maybe we can keep those towards the end. Digging into it though, what is the challenge of shipping beer direct to consumer? Because it can be challenging. And so first off, as always, I kind of want to define my terms and just differentiate direct to consumer shipping from all the other myriad forms of direct-to-consumer sales there are. These are not tasting room sales where somebody comes in, buys a six-pack and walks away. These are not sales through Drizzly, which may be online, may be serviced directly to a consumer, but those are going through a local retailer, not from you, the remote, possibly brewery. These are direct-to-consumer shipments, which really require the use of a third-party service, a carrier, to fulfill that order, to bring it from you, from the brewery, to the consumer, possibly in a different state. And because of that interaction, because of that play of the third-party carrier, that's what really makes these sort of a trickier type of sale, a lot more nuanced, and kind of a novel thing that a lot of state regulators are still grappling with and creating unique rules for it that you might need to manage. So again, just trying to keep this in mind that, again, we're talking about that shipping aspect, which does really kind of add all these different interplays to the actual sale process. It also helps, I think, to always understand where shipping can be done, because it is really not very widely available, especially when it comes to beer and spirits products. This is the map of what products can be shipped interstate. These are the states that have very clear, specific rules on different products that can be shipped. It really matters where the consumer is based, not necessarily where the shipper is based. So that even though Utah clearly does not permit any type of direct-to-consumer shipping, you can be a brewer in Utah and ship into pretty much any other state, any of these light blue or green states that allow direct-consumer shipping of beer along with other product types. A couple quick asterisks there. Oregon operates under what's called a reciprocal agreement, which means that they will only license breweries that are located in other states that themselves allow direct-to-consumer shipping. So unfortunately, you can't be a Utah brewery and ship into Utah, but you can be a Nebraska brewery and ship into Oregon. I'm sorry. And similarly, Pennsylvania, for whatever reason, only will give their direct-consumer licenses to businesses that have a specific off-premises retail license or a wholesaler license. Even if your beer manufacturing license gives you wholesale permissions, gives you off-sale retail permissions, Pennsylvania has made it clear they want a specific retail or wholesaler license. So just keep those in mind as you are exploring the different states that you might want to ship into and reaching out to those customers in those states to sort of shore up your business and grow your market share. But this really does kind of bring me to my first point about partners and what we can do and who to look forward to, because we really want to grow this map. It is, you can see how thoroughly the wine market has kind of conquered the map, has gone from state to state and established rules. Well, that has not really happened so far when it comes to beer, and we really want that to expand. And so the first thing we need to really recognize when it comes to working together and finding partners is that's the best way we can grow this map. Establish further permissions for you to ship to more consumers. And this does reflect in a recent report that we recently published, the 2022 Direct-to-Consumer Beer Shipping Report, which Sovos ShipCompliant published in collaboration with the Brewers Association. So a very big thank you and props to the Brewers Association for all their help in putting that together. This was a survey of American beer drinkers across the different states on their interest in direct-to-consumer shipping. And not very surprisingly, there was widespread interest in direct-to-consumer beer shipping. 9 in 10 respondents said that they had an interest in having access to that market, which really is contrasted when we look quickly back at this map, that ultimately only 14.8% of legal drinking age adults are in those states that allow direct consumer shipping of beer. And so despite the vast interest there is among American beer consumers, most of them are prohibited by law from getting access to that market. Notably, the report also indicated that there is clear interest to expand, to spend on money. I think that there is some claims out there that maybe beer isn't as effectively monetized in direct consumer shipping as maybe wine or spirits are, but respondents clearly indicated that they're willing to spend $50 a month, almost half said over $100 a month, if they had access to that market. And so it's definitely there's interest out there. And if you have more interest in finding out that report, it's free to download. Just go to DtCbeerreport.com. You can find out all that survey data. And I think that, again, really getting back to this, how do we spread, is using the wine model to spread beer. I think you might look at that map and think that wine just clicked their fingers and had that availability. But it was really decades of effort. It was very specifically over the last 15, 20 years, very concerted effort going state by state to expand their direct consumer options and using collaborating with local guilds, getting together, showing broad industry interest, and really engaging with consumers to build a grassroots movement, because legislators care about their constituents much more than about out-of-state breweries. And so it's about engaging with all of the members of this industry, engaging with consumers, showing that clear interest. That's how we can go and expand this map and make more of this map light blue, at least. And so more options for you to ship to people in California, New York, Texas, everywhere. There are a couple bills in California and New York this year to add direct consumer shipping options. And so, again, we just encourage everybody to encourage your consumers in those states to reach out to their local legislatures and get those bills passed, because those would be huge markets for everybody. Understanding the direct consumer shipping also requires kind of understanding what are the basic laws. And because these then reflect on what sort of support you might need. This is really kind of where it gets complicated, is trying to manage the compliance end of it, understanding what are the different rules, what are the different requirements and follow-ups you need to do to be able to ship beer into different states. And then along with that, there is a whole logistical end. There's the actual physically shipping beer and putting it in packages and making sure it's safe as it gets across the country. And, these can be very complicated, especially if you have a very large, robust DtC shipping market. There's a lot to track, a lot to pay attention to. And so it is very important to be aware of the support that is out there. And even more importantly, make sure that the support you're getting is effective, is on point, and is going to help you build your market and build this market generally. So let's get into a little bit about how you can manage your shipping options. And I'm actually going to start kind of, I guess, technically at the end of it, is what happens once you sold a product, when you have connected with a consumer and you're actually trying to ship it, is recognizing perhaps the most important partner you'll get out there is the carrier who is going to be actually delivering your beer. And because that they're going to be, they're required for you to use when you're actually shipping, and because they play such an important role in transporting and safeguarding your beer, you really want to make sure you're working with a good carrier. I think clearly UPS and FedEx are the largest carriers in the United States, so they readily come to mind. They both have very robust alcohol delivery programs, and both are expanding their beer options. So, I don't think you need to privilege one over the other. Just be aware of what their options are and evaluate what your needs are. But there are other alcohol-based focused carriers out there. A lot of them operate maybe regionally, focusing on the West Coast or the Midwest areas for their shipping options. So you do not necessarily need to work just with the big two. There are plenty of other options out there. But what is really important is to understand and make sure that they are very focused on the alcohol business, and they understand what are the entire gamut of rules and restrictions and issues that can come up when you are transporting alcohol across state borders. Just a quick note, USPS, the Postal Service, is actually prohibited by federal law from carrying any alcoholic product. So currently they are unavailable. There is a bill in front of Congress currently to expand, to remove that prohibition, allow the Postal Service to carry alcohol. It's got support, but it may not necessarily have the legs to actually make it. Excuse me. And then, frankly, even if it passes, I've got some questions about how effectively the Postal Service could actually be as a transporter of alcohol. But if nothing else, it would be great to have an option. We're all about having choices in options and extending what is available to you. So it'd be great if the Postal Service could carry alcohol. Just know that at this time they cannot. And so, again, it's all about recognizing the carriers who can carry alcohol, what they're doing, and what they need to be aware of. And then a key thing is that, again, they should be making sure that you can ship alcohol as well. If they're just going to blindly accept any package you give them, you might have some questions about how effective and how knowledgeable they are actually at transporting alcohol, because there are a lot of requirements and a lot more pressure placed on carriers besides merely just picking up a box and moving it from point A to point B. They are really the last and most important step in performing that age checks and making sure that your product does not ever get in the hands of a minor. Because if they're not making that check and they're dropping it off on a porch and some kid picks it up, states are going to go after you for that. They are going to see your name on that label and they're going to say something went wrong here, and they're going to get very upset if they get a lot of notices of minors getting alcohol. So you definitely want to make sure that whatever carrier you use has a robust service for performing age checks, getting signatures, all that stuff. But you also want to make sure that they are capable of ensuring the safety of your packages. They're not going to be breaking bottles or anything, because that is, clear, very problematic. It's going to be a bad customer experience. It's going to cost you a lot. So you just want to make sure that they do have the care, do have the knowledge of how to ship alcohol. And so it's, again, about understanding what are the other implications and requirements put on carriers. Because I think that, where there's a lot of focus on regulations that are placed on the brewers themselves, the need to get licensed, the paying taxes. But there are rules and regulations on basically every actor in direct consumer shipping. Carriers especially. Many states do require carriers to get licensed, to have some sort of proof that they can transport alcohol within the state. Many states require carriers to file reports on every shipment they make, providing details on the delivery date, who gets it, where it's coming from, the weight of the package, all these sort of things that the states use to verify that the packages of the shipments of alcohol going into their borders are legal, are compliant, are all proper and above board. And if it seems that carriers are not doing this right, well, they're really at risk of facing a lot of regulatory scrutiny themselves. It's been a few years, but back in the, I think around 2017, 2018, there was a real panic for a bit where states were cracking down on carriers and basically threatening their entire business if in light of perceived failures to properly regulate shipments of beverage alcohol. States were saying that carriers are, delivering it to minors, and they said, okay, FedEx, you can improperly ship alcohol, or you can ship nothing at all. And as much money as FedEx and UPS might make from carrying alcohol products, they make much, much more just carrying T-shirts and books. And so if there is this crackdown, if the regulators are seen as a problem that states crack down on, and they stop the alcohol shipping programs, that's really going to have a negative effect, a very clear negative effect on our entire business lines. And so it's about respecting the regulations that carriers themselves face, the scrutiny they face themselves, and making sure that we, create a healthy and compliant market overall. And so, you want to work with carriers that are aware of the regulatory burdens, that are going to be compliant with their regulatory burdens, that are going to be making sure that they're following up on everything, and that you're good partners to them as well. Again, they need to report a lot of data, so make sure they're getting that data, make sure that you are getting licensed, that you're doing everything yourself to make sure that the carriers are not involved in anything wrong, so that this business can continue to grow and thrive. And so again, when you are looking at a carrier, you really want to do a couple checks and just make sure that your carriers are compliant. Really ask about their age verification practices, their signature practices. Again, if states don't think that carriers are doing something right, not only will the carriers face scrutiny, but that can be imparted back onto you. So just make sure that they're following up with everything. And then, of course, there's the whole logistical end of it. Make sure that your carriers can actually care for your beer. There has been a tremendous amount of effort and development over the last 10 years among carriers in providing more specific practices for carrying alcohol, including having specific refrigerated trucks to transport it around. We know that beer is a very, very fickle product and may not be so robust to handle a trip across the country in a little brown box. But there are ways to make it a lot safer, a lot easier. So you want to understand what your options are and utilize them. And, they all have best practices on packaging as well. How much styrofoam to use, what sort of containers to use to make sure that you're not creating anything at risk of bottles breaking, which is going to really affect all the other packages they have as well. Pardon me. And of course, it's very important to also use their tracking services to create a good customer experience. If you have a case of a customer who is not available to sign, you want to understand that you want to be using the tracking services to recognize when a package was not delivered, so you can reach out to your consumer, say, hey, we realize you weren't at home. Is there a better address we can use? Is there a time we should schedule for this shipment so that you can actually receive your package? and create a good customer experience then, because if it's weeks and weeks before they actually get their beer, or it turns out they can't actually get their package at all because it was returned as undeliverable, it's going to be a bad experience. And so you want to use the services that are available, understand what options the carriers might be offering to you to make that available, and again, help you create a good customer experience. When we're talking about shipping, there's also the question of how do you even get beer in a package to get it ready to ship, and what kind of fulfillment services might be available out there. Because if you are selling and if you're ready to ship, it kind of doesn't matter if you don't have the packages, if you don't have the brown boxes, if you don't have the material to keep your beer safe in transit, all that sort of thing. You want to have access to and make sure it's readily available. And you can certainly have in-house fulfillment. You can have your team be ready to package your beer and get it shipped out, but you want to make sure that they're ready. They have the supplies, they have the time, they have the experience to do that. Or you can look into what kind of third-party services are out there. There are these services, we call them fulfillment houses, which are extremely common in direct-to-consumer shipping of wine. These are warehouses that have actually been around for decades. There are specific licensees, very common in California, where you can store your alcohol off premises in bond until it is ready to be sold. And as direct-to-consumer shipping expanded, they also realized they were in a very good position to interact with carriers and bring the alcohol into packages and ready to be shipped. And so again, while they're very active in wine, they are expanding into beer as well. So you might want to look around and see what kind of third-party logistical services there are that can help you store and package and ship your beer when it is ready to be sold. It's good to note that, however, states are kind of cracking down on fulfillment houses as well recently. They're seen as sort of a weak link in the direct-to-consumer market, an area where there is states regulators have questions, and so they've been passing new laws to regulate fulfillment houses, requiring them to get licensed, requiring them to file reports, again, trying to better track what kind of shipments of alcohol are being made. And so as you do find a 3PL that might be able to help you, you do want to ask them how aware they are of those licensing and reporting requirements, what they're doing to comply with them, and how aware they are about future changes to those rules out there as well. But then, of course, you want to make sure about those just logistical services as well. How are they going to be safekeeping your beer? What kind of storage do they use? How do they make sure it doesn't get mixed in with other products? You also want to see if they have any deals with carriers. A lot of these 3PLs have a specific relationship to one carrier, and they might be able to give you a deal on your shipping rates, which is extremely helpful. Shipping is probably one of the shipping costs, that is probably one of the heavier barriers to accessing this market, especially for breweries. So if you can get a deal on that, absolutely look for that. But it's just a matter, again, of getting ahead of this, making sure that you can actually get your beer into packages and ready to be shipped across. And finally, when it comes to managing your shipping, there are compliance services out there. Again, I talked a little bit about those rules that you need to follow. If you want to know more about them, please look back into past craft beer professional seminars where I've talked about these rules, give more details on the licensing, customer volume limits, taxes, all that sort of stuff, all that sort of compliance rules that you need to manage. And if you've seen those, you probably get a sense of how complicated it can be to manage all of that. There are, all the different states have different rules and different specific rules on how they can regulate direct consumer shipping of beer. And so you want to be aware of the specific rules, not be applying Ohio's rules when you're shipping to Virginia. And you need to be tracking those for each order. A lot of states have volume limits that say you can only ship, 1 case per month or 12 cases per year. You want to be tracking your shipments to make sure that Joe Smith at 123 Main Street doesn't over purchase, because that will be definitely something that states are cracking down on and will do enforcement action against you if they see that happening. And so you definitely want to be tracking those rules, tracking your orders to make sure they're in compliance, and just being aware generally of what kind of things you need to comply with. And so when we're looking at compliance services, I think that there's a very clear one that I would advertise for, would plug for. Its name is on this slide, and we definitely have a very robust compliance service ready to support the beer industry as well. But if nothing else, you just want to talk to your attorneys, talk to consultants who do have that expertise, can tell you about your specific requirements so that you can follow it up on your own, even if you don't necessarily sign up with a specific compliance service. There are a lot of consultants out there as well to help if you don't want to use a software service, just ways to make this easier. Although I would say one thing you really want to be aware of and probably would need some help on is managing all of the tax returns and shipping reports that are required. State can have up to 3, you can be required to file a sales tax return, an excise tax return, and a shipping report each month for the different states. All of those have their own different nuances and different specifics. Sales tax especially can get very complicated. Depending on the state you're shipping into, you might need to know a lot of different rates, a lot of different specifics, and you need to make sure that you're getting alcohol specific rates. So if you're just using a very generic tax service, they may not recognize that, direct consumer or the beer is taxed at 10.25% in DC, or that New Hampshire, a famously non-sales tax state, actually does require you to pay an 8% tax you can collect from your consumers. So you really want to know those specifics as it relates to direct consumer shipping of beer, so you can get those calculated at time. You don't have to pay the difference out of your pocket. You can report them on time, and especially you can get all of your order data onto your reports, so it's not a lot of number crunching and Excel work all at once the first week of every month to get those reports filed on time. So again, these are all kind of those different services that you would be, or at least highly recommended, if not required in terms of carrier, when you are doing direct consumer shipping and managing it yourselves and handling all that sort of licensing and marketplace sort of issues yourselves. These are the kind of partners I would recommend looking for. And again, you always want to check out what they're doing, how experienced they are with alcohol, how knowledgeable of this industry are, because you don't want to be using somebody who is used to shipping socks when you're shipping beer. It's definitely different markets. But there are other services out there, and especially when it comes to the actual selling and marketing of beer, that you may want to look into. And so we want to talk a little bit about the nuances of how to build your marketplace, and especially when it comes to trying to find a third person support in building out your marketplace, because there are a lot of frankly, arcane rules and restrictions on that may not be readily obvious. And if you just trust what somebody's saying on their website, you could kind of end up in some potential hot water. And so you really want to be aware of those rules and restrictions, what's out there. And so that's what we'll talk about next. So when it comes to selling beer online, there are kind of those two different phases. There's the marketing and the actual selling of it. And so the marketing is kind of how do you get your word out there, how do you advertise your product. And I think that there are a lot of established ways to market beer online, but it's really important to recognize that just because it's online does not mean that it's inherently all right. And so you've got to be aware of, I think we're all aware of different restrictions on advertising beer in real life. If you're going to put anything in the newspaper or have any kind of poster printed up, all this sort of restrictions and tied house trade practice restrictions that might apply, those all apply when you're selling online as well. And so just because you're putting a post on a social media network doesn't mean that you can necessarily advertise one retailer over the other. It doesn't mean that you can make health claims on there or all sorts of other things. It's sort of the general rule is, again, if you can't do it in real life, you can't do it online either. So you want to be aware of those restrictions. There might be some specific rules when it comes to advertising a DtC program. I'm not sure that these are in effect in any states that allow beer to be shipped, but definitely there are some states that allow wine to be shipped, where you would need to identify yourself as a DtC shipper, showcasing your DtC license, all that sort of stuff to prove that you can actually advertise these products. And so again, you just want to be aware of that. And then there are more nuances when it comes to actually selling the product, when you set up your online shop. There are a tremendous amount of services out there that are all about building e-commerce platforms and selling online. And many of them are readily available for you. You don't necessarily need to go with an alcohol specific platform, but you just want to make sure that they can work with alcohol rules. Again, you really want to be doing those order by order compliance checks. So you don't just want to pull in every order that might be coming in through an online marketplace. And you really want to be making sure you're getting your accurate alcohol specific tax calculations, because otherwise you're going to be having to pay that tax money out of your own pocket. But then there are a lot more kind of complicated questions when it comes to working through a third-party marketplace where maybe your name is not obviously the seller of record. And this kind of comes down to a little bit of a somewhere between a law and a principle in alcohol, is that the name on the storefront really should be the name on the license. You're almost always going to need a license to sell alcohol. And the kind of principle is that a consumer should have very clear understanding of who they're dealing with, who they're working with, and how they're operating. And so if they have a problem, they can go to the state regulators and say, this was a storefront I had a problem with. The regulators can look at the license and say, this is what's going on there. This is why it's allowed or not allowed, what problems there might have been. And so if you're working with a third-party marketplace, the consumer doesn't necessarily know that you're actually behind the sale. That can be problematic. And it becomes even more questionable if you are trying to sell under somebody else's license. So let's get into a little bit of those details, because you always want to make sure that, again, it comes down to compliance. It comes down to understanding the potential risks that are out there if and when something goes wrong. Because again, at the end of the day, your name is on that label. And so if a state thinks something is going wrong, you're the party they're going to reach out to and check to make sure what's going on and send fines or other enforcement action if indeed something is going wrong. So when you are looking at a third-party marketplace, you really want to understand who is actually selling the beer. Again, if you own licenses, if your name is on the marketplace, that's the clearest, safest path of all. It may take a lot of effort on your part. It can be a lot of work, but that is definitely the safest way to go about it, is just handling it yourself, making sure that you are clearly the seller of record, you're clearly licensed, you're paying taxes, and all these sort of things that you want to understand. Because if the third-party marketplace you're working with is saying, we're going to handle it, well, you really want to make sure that it can handle it. And this definitely comes down to a big question when they say, we have licenses to ship into these different states, so you don't need to worry about that. You just sell your product on our site, and we will ship under our license. And the real question there is then, in that situation, if they're the licensee, that kind of means they're the seller. And if they're a third-party seller, that kind of means they're a retailer. And one thing is, there are a lot of different rules for retailers doing direct-to-consumer shipping. In most of the states that allow beer to be shipped, they do allow retailers to do the shipping as well. You do not necessarily have to be a producer, but there are a couple states, I believe, Ohio, Vermont, Kentucky, that allow beer to be direct-to-consumer shipped, but do not allow retailers to do that shipping. And then if they are a retailer, this kind of brings up a bigger question of, don't you need to be working through the three-tier system then? Don't you need to be providing your beer to them, handing over ownership of it to them to resell, and working through perhaps distributors and all those other three-tier compliance questions? And again, this really comes up in a situation where they're saying, we're the licensed party. You don't worry about it. We're going to handle all this compliance. There are some other situations when it comes to taxes that are, again, a little bit nuanced, a little bit complicated, that might apply even if you have the license, if you are the seller of record. This comes across when in relation to a lot of these economic nexus rules you might have heard about popping up over the last few years. These are rules that states have adopted, extending basically long-arm jurisdiction when it comes to sales tax liability, requiring remote sellers that make certain revenue in the state to collect sales tax. A lot of states have passed rules extending those to marketplaces. And so a marketplace like Etsy or eBay will need to collect and remit sales tax on behalf of their sellers. Even if the individual seller only makes $1,000 in a state, This service itself has to collect and manage the sales tax on behalf of their sellers. But this again comes down to kind of a principle / rule in alcohol, is that only a licensee is supposed to collect money from a sale of alcohol. And the question then is collection of sales tax money collecting money from a sale of alcohol or not? And is that proper? And currently, only California has come out with a ruling on that, where the California ABC has said, we do not consider collecting sales tax to be collecting money from a sale of alcohol. So marketplaces, you're clear to collect sales tax on behalf of any seller who's using you to sell alcohol. That's fine. But no other state has come out and said that. And so there really is this sort of unknown question out there about how legitimate it is if you are working with a marketplace that is collecting sales tax on your behalf. I think that a lot of states have not necessarily come out with a ruling because they may not be really aware of that situation. Again, it's really sort of a back burner sort of thing, but it could come up. And so you just really want to be aware, again, of your responsibility. Maybe you should sign up with your marketplace where you're going to collect tax instead, manage your sales tax needs instead of the marketplace if you're going to use one of these services. But again, it's just a question to understand about what your marketplace is promising, what sort of actions they're going to do on your behalf. Again, if they're going to be collecting taxes on your behalf, but you're licensed, you want to be aware of those nuances. And especially then if they are saying, we're licensed, we're going to be managing it all, that's really where it gets very questionable. And you really want to dig in and understand how they're going to be operating, because frankly, it's not easy to tell. They hide a lot of this information in contracts, in terms and conditions. So it's not necessarily clear how they're operating. And if they're doing something wrong, again, that can very easily be imputed back to you. And you could get in trouble, even if you're not necessarily aware of the things they're doing wrong. And so a couple things you really want to double check if you are looking into a third-party marketplace and they're promising something that sounds really too good to be true. You really want to double check on that and ask detailed questions, ask nuanced questions. And frankly, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. And a big watch out there is anybody who promises they can ship to all 50 states, because that is definitely not allowed. Yeah, nobody can ship into Utah is always kind of the bugaboo there. Definitely the one. If anybody's saying they're shipping into Utah, they're doing something either that nobody else has ever heard of, or they're doing something wrong. And so you really want to be aware about those promises, make sure that they can uphold with them, make sure that they are actually handling if they say they're handling compliance, make sure they're actually doing that. And it's interesting because there are a lot of cases where, a service will say that we're just this platform, we can handle it all. We're going to end up selling it, in a way that you don't need to worry about. And it turns out that they are sending orders in through retailers who, maybe are not acting in the most scrupulous manner. And could be a brewery in California and it ends up being fulfilled from a retailer in Florida and you don't know about it, but it's still your name on the label. And if a state finds that order, they're going to say that you were involved in that and doing something wrong and might be able to initiate an enforcement action against you. So you really want to understand, again, exactly how these marketplaces are working. And if they're not forthright, then that's, questions that maybe there's something hidden there they're trying to hide, and you want to not necessarily work with them. Another big thing that we've seen coming up a lot lately, and this is really, a developing issue, and every regulator I've talked to, every other attorney I've talked to about this all gives it the stink eye, all says this is not allowed. And yet we see a lot of services trying to do this, are trying to contract their way out of compliance. And essentially what they are doing is they're trying to set the sale of venue in one state and then hand title off to the consumer. And then it's the consumer's responsibility to do the shipping. So for instance, they might be a retailer in California, and they say that in the terms and conditions to the consumer, the sale is concluded in California. California's law applies. Title of ownership passes in California. And so there is this box of beer in a California retailer's location that is ostensibly owned by, say, a consumer who is in Texas and has never actually been in California. And in one regard, that's perfectly fine. People can buy alcohol anywhere. The big question is, how does that beer then get back to the consumer in Texas? And a lot of states do allow for personal importation, but those rules almost always require that to be personally imported, meaning it's got to be carried back by the consumer in their luggage, in their checked luggage, or in their trunk. It's got to be in their possession at all times. They cannot use a third-party carrier to ship to themselves. And, I think that a lot of, on its face, that seems ridiculous. That's my beer. I own it. I can do whatever I want with it. But that's not how state laws work. They do restrict that only licensees, only certain parties can affect transportation of alcohol within their borders. And so when you have this California retailer saying that, title passes to the Texas resident in California, and it's a Texas consumer who is then shipping it back to themselves, and maybe the California retailer is just acting as their agent, or is just acting, doing it on behalf of the consumer, that is still not allowed. Because that consumer is not themselves able to be to ship back to themselves, and therefore not able to hire somebody else to do it on their behalf. And again, if your name is on the front page of one of these services saying, we love how easy this is, Texas is not going to look at that very friendly. They're going to say, you're clearly benefiting from this. There's a problem with that, and we're going to issue fines. We're going to take other action against you. And states are cracking down on remote sellers, even if they're not licensed. They're using what's called the 21st Amendment Enforcement Act to have this long-arm jurisdiction and go after bad actors in the DtC market. So again, this is just, all back to the idea of that if a third-party marketplace says, we got it, don't worry about it, worry about it. They're doing something that is perhaps behind the scenes, perhaps shady, and perhaps illegal. And if you're signing up for that, then that can be that you're signing up for the risk with that as well. And so you definitely want to be tracking that, asking difficult questions, and not just relying on the wave handing. And look into terms and conditions. Look into your contract to make sure that you understand how they're setting up these sales, who is a seller of record, who is responsible for compliance, licensing, all that sort of stuff. Because again, at the end of the day, the state is going to think it should be you. And if nobody else is complying with it, you're going to be the one who gets in trouble for that. So again, just a matter of trusting, verifying, tracking, asking difficult questions about these third-party marketplaces. I want to quickly talk a little bit about another developing issue we've seen. This is something I've heard a little bit more in terms of spirits distilleries trying to get into direct consumer shipping, but I think it's something it's crossing across all product types, is the so-called 3-tier DtC model, which is sort of kind of a developing service that is promising to combine the different channels and offering the best of both. That essentially it's allowing you as a producer to direct sale, to market your product, to set your prices, and to initiate sales to your consumers, and then utilize existing distribution methods, all those logistics services to actually fill the orders and have your beer get transported. And a lot of them are claiming they have national coverage. They have the partnerships and the different relationships where they can get alcohol to everyone everywhere. But there are a lot of questions about that. And again, not things that they whenever you do ask them about it, they kind of hand wave and say, don't worry about it. These are not real issues. And again, I think that you really want to, again, ask these questions about how they're operating, know what's going on, because, to me, it kind of seems that a 3-tier DtC order is really just a 3 tiers order, at least when it comes to the perspective of a brewery. Because again, you could be a brewery in California working with one of these 3-tier DtC services. They have their partnerships with a California retailer, California distributors. But kind of when you enter into these systems, you're handing it off. You're handing your product off to those partners to handle it in the similar way as you would for any other 3-tier order. And so it's kind of questioning what really is a DtC end here. I guess beyond just advertising your product and getting consumers to reach out to you for a sale. And then when it comes to actually making a sale, I've got some tight house questions there. These are rules that restrict interactions between different tiers. These are the rules that require you to, when you're saying, we're available at these stores to at least list 2 stores and not 1 store. You cannot be retailer specific. And so if you are in one of these programs where you are essentially then directing your consumers to make a purchase, even if the consumer doesn't know it on its face, you're directing that sale to a specific retailer, to your partner retailers to fulfill. That to me seems like a Tide House violation, because you are, again, signaling out a specific one retailer to make this sale, privileging them against all others. That really kind of flies in the face of Tide House rules. And then, again, if you are operating in one of these systems, even if it's a retailer that has national reach, that kind of brings up questions about how your beer might be getting to a Texas location for fulfillment. Because don't you need to be managing a lot of 3-tier regulations to get your beer into Texas? You need to get a out-of-state non-resident seller license. You need to get your products registered, your brand labels registered in the state. You need to make sure your distributor is paying taxes. And again, so it kind of comes down to, it's just a 3-tier sale with more steps involved. But then, there is kind of this question then at the end of the day is, when they're promising they have full 50-state coverage, how is that possible? Even the largest, most robust, most prevalent retailer is not operating in all 50 states. Famously, Utah is a control state for beer over 5% ABV. And so if you have beer over 5% ABV, that can only be sold in state stores in Utah. And so even if the retailer is saying we can do local delivery, local coverage, I don't know how they're selling that product themselves in a state like Utah or other places. And even states that do allow delivery by retailers, often those are location specific. In Texas, again, retailers can only deliver within the county where they are licensed. So even if you're working with a retailer that has operations in Houston and Austin and Fort Worth and Dallas, how are they selling into Amarillo? How are they bringing it to El Paso? All these sort of things about, you just kind of wonder how these systems are actually operating. And it gets very questionable when these services don't answer your questions, when they say, just don't worry about it, we got it handled. I think a lot of them are relying on the 3-tier term to say that it's obviously compliant, it's obviously correct, because that's what people think about 3-tier these days. But when it comes to these more specific questions about direct-to-consumer shipping, again, there are just a lot of unknowns that they're not answering. And the potential risk is still on you if something goes wrong. So you really want to dig into it and not necessarily trust what they're promising if it sounds to be too good. And so that really comes down to, what are the takeaways I think you should really get from this presentation? And it comes down to really understanding what direct consumer shipping is, how it works, and how the different services that are available out there to help you actually work, and how they operate, how they're managing their own compliance needs, how they're going to make sure that you're not at risk, how they're just making this a more robust and viable market entirely. And so I think that a lot of my presentations end up kind of becoming a little doom and gloom. It's so complicated, it's so hard, who really wants to do this? Well, it's really kind of overstating it, because one, again, there's clearly a lot of potential reward out there, especially if and when we see more states adopting direct consumer shipping permissions. There is a lot of money available for this, a lot of interest among beer consumers out there to get their hands, to have access to this market. And so I think there should be a lot of interest among breweries about how to get into this, especially now when it's a little bit nascent, a little bit developing, kind of get on the ground floor. And there are definitely ways to make it easier. You do want to find your good partners. You want to make sure that your carriers are robust, are effective, are making sure that your products are getting there safely and compliantly. You're working with consultants or attorneys or compliance services that can help you manage your compliance needs, tracking your orders, making sure everything is above board, making sure you're paying your taxes on time. And then there are, again, a lot of services out there. I think I kind of poo-pooed a little bit on marketplaces, but that's not to say that there are not a lot of services out there to help you. And especially once you find one good partner, we work with a lot of other partners out there. We know everybody else in the industry and can direct you to good marketplaces, good carriers to help you really build that out. And then if you are looking around, Googling, searching up for your own services, you can trust what people are saying, but you really want to verify what's going on and how they're actually operating. So even if you're working with a marketplace that sounds great, they say we can only ship into 10 states. We're going to be managing your taxes in a proper way. Verify that. Just kind of ask them a little bit of pointed questions to make sure they are actually doing that. And especially if something does sound too good to be true, if somebody's saying they're shipping into Utah, that should really raise your concern, raise your hackles, and maybe not be something you want to jump into, because again, they're doing something that nobody else has figured out how to do legally, and that brings up a lot of questions. And you definitely want to stay vigilant yourself. There's a lot of personal responsibility when it comes to direct consumer shipping, managing all these risks and obligations. And so you just want to be aware of what rules are out there. If nothing else, you want to be aware of what states might be creating new permissions, but then you also want to be aware of, again, those nuances of taxes, if there are any updates to rules, if there are any changes to rules. Notably, if you're paying attention, you might have realized that the map I showed earlier is smaller than the one that last year. Because last June, Nevada passed a law prohibiting or again, removing the direct consumer shipping of beer permissions. And so last year you could ship to Nevada. Now you can't because the law changed. You want to be aware of that and not be shipping to Nevada still when it's improper to do so. So it's about that personal responsibility and just being aware of what's going on in the industry when it comes to regulatory changes and understanding how you should manage things. Because again, like I keep saying, at the end of the day, it's your name on the beer. And so therefore, you're going to be the one that a state might think should be responsible for all this. And you definitely want to get ahead of it so that you can build your market to be robust. And again, this entire industry to be much more effective and a healthy and safe place for people, for the beer consumers, to get access to the products they want and love and clearly have an interest in. So with that, I will quickly catch my breath. Again, I want to thank you all so much for joining me today. Thanks for paying attention. If you do have any more questions about what we offer, please go to our website, sovos.com/shipcompliant. We have a lot of resources and available information if you just want to look up different rules and be aware of the different rules about direct consumer shipping, or find out more about how we can help you, certainly. And again, a really big thank you to Andrew and Craft Beer Professionals Organization for inviting me back. This is always, such a great time to be able to get out there, tell everybody about this, and just kind of get out there and try to educate the industry. I think I have a little bit of time. If we do have questions coming in, feel free to send those in the comments. I'm just noticing that, yes, absolutely, North Dakota does allow direct consumer shipping of beer. They have for quite a while. And so great to see that state is available. They allow direct consumer shipping of spirits and by retailers as well. So really one of the more liberal, more open states. It's actually fairly easy to get licensed there and to manage everything. So North Dakota might actually be a model for many other states to adopt. Other than that, I can sit around for a couple minutes, but I might just say I maybe have answered all your questions. And so just one last thank you to everybody, and looking forward to the opportunity to talk to you all again. So again, thank you to the craft beer professionals. Thank you to all of you, and until next time.